African poetry is the oldest form of literature. For generations, African poets used powerful words to engage with each other and to express the beauty of the world around them. That remains true today as the new generation continue to use poetry to rebuild and forge a more connected and caring world. Hello everyone and welcome to Our Voices. I am Semenyi Shekoye and I'm joined by my co-hosts Oriane Itangishaka and Amina Aliyu. Hello ladies.
Good morning. Hello.
Good morning.
Oh, good day.
Yes, but before we start our show, Oriane, you received Unsung Hero Award this past weekend.
I sure did.
I know. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, ladies. It was amazing. I sort of wasn't expecting it because it's such a big award, such a big acknowledgement. I was competing against organizations. So for a community to acknowledge you as an unsung hero, it's pretty big. So I'm thankful.
Yeah, and it had also poems there, right?
Yes, amazingly enough, we're talking about poetry today. The event began with a very powerful, beautiful poem by Berta Nibigira, who really beautifully put a poem about Burundi and the community and women together in a very beautiful and powerful way. So
is that
I'm excited.
Your favorite?
It's one of my favorites. So I'm hoping to share one of her pieces today.
All right. Okay. I mean, I also believe honestly that in general, words have a healing power, but when it comes also in the form of poem, for me it just evokes emotion. For example, my favorite poet, Lemon Sisai, he has this poem called Let There Be Peace. I feel like with his words he's brushing my heart, I can just feel and touch that peaceful world that he kind of exactly in the poem. What about you, Amina?
Yeah, when I was looking at you, I wasn't thinking I could relate. I'm like, that's where my sophistication ends. I know nothing about poetry.
Wow. I don't believe that.
Girl, the only poem that comes to mind right now is one that I learned like in primary school. Like, who sat and watched my infant head when sleeping on my cradle bed and tears of sweet affection shed? My mother.
You see?
You see how the power of words
is stuck in you.
That's it. I was so good with literature in school. Poetry, I failed. It was a horror.
Yeah, I'm not
That's
good
where my
writing.
sophistication ends.
I can edit the poems, but I can't write them.
But somehow, it stayed with you, and that's how poems are powerful. Drawing on abundance of diversity in culture and language, African poetry has inspired generations across the continent, from traditional poetry, which was mostly in oral forms, to contemporary poetry. African poets turn to creative expression in rhythm to grieve, celebrate, honor loved ones, or build identity. But in recent years, a growing number of young women from the continent are embracing poetry to speak up their rights. They are using it to promote peace, advocate for change, or to explain Africa through the eyes of women. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we will explore women poetry in sub-Saharan Africa. We will look at how women are using poetry to tell powerful stories and hear directly from women poets about their inspiration, struggles, and hopes.
That's right. Well, let's start in Senegal, where slam poetry is making its mark on urban culture and offering young people a way to voice their opinion about their lives and society. Seydina Abagui has this report from Senegal, narrated by Salam Salaman.
Through these words, this young slammer who goes by the name Madji takes aim at what she says are the evils that plague Senegalese society. A lover of rhythms, she says she was seduced by slam, although she prefers rap, which is more popular in the streets of Dakar.
Le slam parce que c'est plus simple.
Slam is simpler and it's an art that adapts to many things and many environments. I have to admit, I didn't have the flow to rap. I didn't have other options, and I wanted to really share my writing and my feelings.
Easy but engaging. Since its creation, slam has been one of the ways minorities and the oppressed can express themselves.
The spoken word a été déjà l'arme.
In the United States, for example, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X used verse to express their frustration. So it developed over time. Slam is not for choosing the best poet, but it's just to awaken the community spirit.
Slam, as an art form, is now gaining popularity with young people here in Senegal. Hip-hop experts say the art form appeals to young people.
Bon, parce qu'il y a pas beaucoup de slameurs au Sénégal.
There are not many slammers in Senegal. It is something that has been created for a very long time, which has been part of hip hop for a very long time. But there are not many slammers. Now it's much more visible because it's easy to get a message across through slam. The style is very calm musically. We put forward the message that allows the artist to convey their message as well.
xolam sedd café gi mujj naa
With detailed texts, multifaceted verses, and an often soothing rhythm, artists who practice slam are using verse to paint a picture about their life in Senegal. For Seydina Abaguye in Dakar, Salim Solomon, VOA News.
Thank you for that report. Although poetry existed for generations, women's voices have long been suppressed. But through projects like the Afro Women Poetry in Ghana, African women have been creating a space to use poetry and widen global knowledge about Africa and its women. To learn more about African female poets and their role in their communities, we invited Zizi Jaji, a poet and scholar from Zimbabwe. Ms. Jaji is also an associate professor of English at Duke University with expertise in African and African American literary as well as cultural studies. Ms. Jaji is joining us via Skype from North Carolina. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, and Kwazwai and Afarakuya panel. It's so wonderful to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
All right, yeah, we are happy that you are here. So you grew up in the diaspora, but your poems are still influenced by Zimbabwean culture, as you reference like traditional cattle raising or ancestry in some of your poems. So how did African poetry shape your poems or the message you send out through your poems?
Yes, so actually I was born and educated in Zimbabwe up until university. So the very first poem I would have heard is Dzidzi dzinondi shamisa, which is the Shona version of Amazing Grace. Christianity has been in Zimbabwe for a long time, and so I would argue that even hymns, whatever tradition they come from, are poetry that belongs to Africa. And my grandmother sang that when I was born because my mother was quite in distress and I was born through C-section. So I would say that hearing those hymns, even though over the course of my young childhood, Shona, the language of my family, receded, that was a very important kind of poetry for me. And another one was that when people greet each other in Shona culture, we try to greet each other with a portion of clan praises. So my ancestor, Vanyemba, part of the Majimba Kupa Chidao, which is zebras, would be acknowledged, and we praise, you know, her stripes and dazzling looks when we say hello. Yeah,
such a beautiful.
And I've used that in my poetry.
Very inspiring. But my question for you, Ms. Jaji, is just as with so many other professions, women aren't recognized as they should be. We find that African female poets are also suppressed. So do you feel that women are being denied the ability to be heard in their society?
You know, I think there is definitely a yes, and there's also a not at all. So the yes is that some of the earliest published anthologies, there was one from Senegal in the 1940s. There's one called the Anthology of Modern Poetry from Penguin, had almost no African women in them. And in fact, that modern poetry one had 10 out of 90 some writers who are women. But I think that at the same time, we have lost track of writers like Ama Ataidu, who just passed away this week. But she has this fat book of poems, which were only released a couple years ago. And so there's that kind of situation. I think spoken word is extending some of the ways in which our cultures do give women authority. For example, say a patrilineal aunt, right?
Now, Yeah, and it's unfortunate that she passed, but we still have the wealth of her poems to read. But we're also seeing young women, more and more young women are entering into the poetry scene, especially in the modern way. Do you think that their topics that they're bringing up are stirring enough reactions? And also, do you have any advice for them?
Sure. So yes, I have on this shelf a lot of recent books, particularly all of these have come in the last 10 years. And I see themes, I've had the opportunity to judge some competitions of African poets. I see themes of sexual violence being addressed very directly, and even incest, of really about occupying a range of professions, and even of writing about ecological crisis. So yes, I think that those are expanding, even though there are certain topics, particularly in some contexts, where you can't bring them up. Advice I would have as a professor is read everything that you can get your hands on, particularly African writers. A lot is online. The initiative you mentioned, Poetry International, and so even YouTube. Yeah.
Okay. So I know that the students listening to this have heard everything that you have to say. That's Tsitsi Jaji, a poet and scholar from Zimbabwe. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about women's space in Africa's poetry and how they are using it to find their voice.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Now it's time for a break. When we return, we will meet Tudi, an influential poetess in Washington, D.C., who also creates opportunities for poetry lovers to enjoy poems through competitions. You can also share with us your list of African poets who are making a difference in their communities. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And our handle is @VOA Africa. Use the hashtag VOA Our Voices. We are also on WhatsApp, and our number is US country code +1 202 503 9025. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
Welcome back. You are watching Our Voices. We are discussing how an increasing number of Black women are joining the struggle to reclaim their space and redefine themselves through poetry. To continue our discussion, we have another guest here in the studio, Tudi. She has made a name for herself in the poetry community since 2006. She's also a member of Bass Boys and Poets team, which is a cultural hub here in Washington, D.C. And she has sold over 300 copies of her debut book, Spoken Heard. She also stays busy with her blog, Too Deep Uncensored. Too Deep, welcome to Our Voices.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It is such a pleasure to have you. Too Deep, we're going to be talking to you in a little bit, and you're going to tell me which bus boys and poets you go to here in DC, and I'm going to come there. But before we start our conversation with Too Deep, let's hear from female poets in Kenya and Nairobi about why they chose poetry to express themselves. Our reporter Sharon Barangas talked to Wangui Kimani, Karen Warimi, and Rachel Akinyi for our Your Voice segment.
The reason as to why I chose poetry is because it gives me a space to express myself as a person, and also in this current world it gives me a space to educate and entertain all at the same time.
Poetry creates a platform where I can express myself, my inner thoughts and my feelings. It's a safe space for me as I express those emotions. People relate to my poetry. So it creates a space where we can have different conversations about different things that we are experiencing as people, our emotions, our experiences, our hopes and dreams, mental health issues as well.
Poetry for me is healing. I use my art for social change as well in matters human rights, gender development, and advocacy is very key on my journey. I think for me poetry has always been the place to go to be able to talk about really critical issues that need to be heard.
And so as a poet, expressing myself through art, then it makes other people feel that they are not alone in this world.
The impact has mostly been feedback I receive from people. They tell me, your poetry speaks to me. I relate to it.
I experienced bullying when I was younger. So then through writing and then realizing that through poetry, I can actually release the pains that I felt. It gave me an opportunity to experience myself anew and to appreciate myself and to be able to speak out for everyone else who's going through the same thing. So my journey actually began as a discussion around bullying, and then it built up to advocacy issues.
Welcome again to Deep. So let's first talk about your work as a poet and how it has enabled you to speak as a woman. You have a blog also called Too Deep Uncensored.
Yes.
Do you say that poetry has created a platform for you to be able to speak freely, uncensored?
Yes, as a woman, because poetry is very much a male-dominated place, I had to etch out my own niche within that. And in 2014, my poetry helped me speak on the floor in the Capitol in Annapolis, Maryland. And I helped get a law passed that if you create an act of violence, domestic violence in front of a child, you now get time and a half. And so I use my poetry for activism, for women's rights, for social justice, and poetry kind of desensitizes people because they think it's a show, and then you slip in a powerful message, and then you make them think. It's kind of like comedy, where it's only funny if it's part of it's true. So that's how I use it. You trick them to
thinking you're entertaining them.
Exactly.
It's interesting you should mention that. You perform poems at events like weddings, graduations, and also at Busboys, as Oriana is trying to be in New Stockholm, which is more of a cultural center, right? Where deeper thoughts are exchanged. So what topics do you find move you the most?
Like I said, I love the one that pulls at my heartstrings are speaking from a woman's standpoint. I have a poem called Muslim Angel, and it details the day after Osama bin Laden's situation, how I saw this Muslim woman in the train station being treated. And I wrote the poem about how I have a line in there where I say, God shook Allah's hand, hugged, said many thanks. And so it's creating those moments that everyone can hop on bandwagons and trends, but we need to talk about how we as women talk to one another, how we can, engage and be a community within a community.
And when you're writing when you're doing the process of writing the poem, how do you take the audience into the different emotions that you want them to fall into? Because I mean, these messages are very deep, and when you look at poets, or when you listen to poets, they always use rhythm. They always use sort of ways to really pull the audience in. What is your strategy?
Sometimes when I read the poem and when I hear it, it has a different
Right.
way of...
Because you can read a poem just like a piece of paper you just read, but you can also use strategies to really pull them in.
So that is where I'm still paying Sally Mae. So I have my Master's of Fine Arts in Theater, so I know how to put cadence, my use of words. I'm a walking lexicon, so I will get a certain word that will pull you in, but the basis of it is truth. Most people will write poems with the audience's like reaction in mind. I could care less about your reaction. I want you to understand what actually happened. And when you speak your truth and your truth inspired you enough to write it, it will inspire someone else to feel it. So there are no gimmicks. I tell you step by step how we got on the train, how we got off, how I held her hand, how, you know, and so when I show you the truth of what occurred, you will always feel truth. Everyone will always feel truth.
I think that's a tip in how to write poems, and I'm going to start with that.
Maybe let's hear one that I'm sure you have a very short poem you can share with us. Let's see, what is it about, and then share.
This one is called Blackness 101, and it's just how I feel as a child of the diaspora, and how I would, I envision myself here and how we have to be in America. So, schools taught by people who look like me, cleaned by people who talk like me, crowded by people who walk like me, forced to learn about people who ain't nothing like me. Stories in the history books becoming more like me, a minority, minor at best, like the captain of the slave ship overthrown by Senegal laid to rest. I want to know more about where I come from, because my mama don't know. I mean, I would ask my granddaddy, but then again, my grandmama don't know. So I came to the conclusion that I was a walking definition of a test tube baby, because God is testing us as we squeeze ourselves into these tubes, into these socially experimental tubes, wondering where the nisk has forever been below minor. Wonder where the Brunson burner forever lights our ignorant behinds on fire, because where there is darkness, there is light, and where there is wrong, I guarantee you that the opposite is right. But I want to know whether Chinese still speak Chinese, whether Latino speaks in the tongues of their ancestors, and why the Italians got a mafia to build a wall around their heritage. But in order for me to graduate from an American school, I must learn every foreign language except for the ones that I would need to speak to my own ancestral kind. But I want to know what it feels like to stand in the middle of an African desert with my palms stretched toward the sun, declaring to God, I am proud to be black. Now, what do you know about that? Because to be black means to be one. To be black means to call on the power of unity and the power of one. To follow up with actions after hours of marching in the sun. To finally see the product of our anthem, we shall overcome. So follow me if you want to register for blackness. 101. Ashe.
Wow. That's what the poets do.
Yes.
I was looking at this is 101 for you.
I was looking at her facial expression, her hand gestures, and even the way you bring out the words. They all speak something to the poem.
Please give us another one. I'm sorry. I want another one.
Before you go to another one,
right?
Places like Busboys,
yes,
do they create an opportunity, a platform for poets like you to be able to communicate to your audience?
And if I may add, Black consciousness.
Yes, so very much thanks to Andy Shalal, who is the owner of Busboys and Poets. In 2007, I walked in and I was like, oh, people do this, you know, regularly. And they gave me a platform, they gave me an opportunity, and I created the 11th Hour Slam, which I hosted for 11 years, and then I passed on to another female African-American poet. I was adamant about passing it to a female. Wow. They were like, can you give me some suggestions? Name 3 people. And I was like, Charity C. Blackwell, Charity B. I was gonna know, this is who I want to pass it to. And so they gave me a safe space to speak my truths and the truth of my people.
Is that why maybe you also put up competitions for other poets to come and participate?
Yes.
I'll try to find your successor.
So I am actually an undefeated poet. Nobody's ever beat me in a slam.
We have an undefeated poet on set. So please give us another, as we close out, just another short one.
Who knew that silence spoke so loudly? Challenge my level of perseverance. Fear screams at you. Success whispers, ask you to believe. Have a little faith in yourself for once. I think I hear it calling my name. They say that courage skips a generation, and fear uses that to bully me. Because my mother was the bravest person I knew. She was the president of my fan club, the gun at the starting line, but I can't seem to reach success because I listened to fear punk me 20 feet from the finish line. But I am tired of pretending I don't hear my calling. As God, for his assistance, said, I'm not asking you for the cheat sheet to the lesson plan you have for my life, but could I at least see the syllabus? Or get a tutor to teach me how to listen a little better? I heard success call my name, and she said, it is a pleasure to finally meet you.
Wow. So the face you see pressed up against the wall, that's going to be Ariana. That's wow.
I was in it, too deep.
Oh my God, this is what I mean by
Thank God this is on camera.
Oh my God, this is what I mean by poems are powerful.
The power of poems,
They can speak to your heart.
That's right.
Thank you.
I was just in it, too deep.
Yes.
Too deep.
You speak your truth, and that was a real conversation I had to God. I was like, okay, I'm not gonna tell you how to do your job, but can you give me a little cheat sheet so that we can make this a little bit easier? But then when you finally do what you're supposed to do, success will show up and go, I was waiting for you. So you have to step up and do that.
Any
yourself.
more publications coming up?
Yes, publications too.
I'm sorry. Any more publications coming up?
I actually am starting to work on my next book, and I told Mother Nikki Giovanni, she said something when I hosted her book signing, and I said, the title of my book will be something that you said. And so, because it was very powerful how she said it, and so I'm like, okay, I'm slowly working to get everything in the works.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Tudip, for coming to our show and sharing your really, really powerful poems and also your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Well, that is our show for today. Thank you, Tudip, again for being with us. We will see you again next week with another exciting program. Be sure to continue the conversation on our social media platforms. Until then, thank you for watching.